Good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda. I'm over here at GreenInfo. So today is a webinar on protected lands and how those get counted or entered in the 30 by 30 effort. So it is hosted by CCLT, which is probably how you learned about this webinar. Unfortunately, Kay can't join us today, but we do have Claire helping on meeting logistics. And then also we have my coworker, Daria, who has her camera off for limited internet connection issues, but she's also here helping. And Daria and I are the main ones who manage the data for CPAD and CCED, which are what feed into the 30 by 30 effort. So I wanted to note that if you attended the webinar we had on Monday, we're going over nearly identical content, just a little bit in case folks have questions. They might be less technical oriented towards GIS and more alternative like PDF maps that you can provide, but you're welcome to stay. But if you're here on Monday, there's probably not a lot new that wasn't already covered there. And as you saw, we are recording the webinar and we'll get that posted and you'll receive notice if need be. So we are a relatively smaller group today. Do feel free to put questions in the chat as you have them. You're also welcome to unmute yourself and just chime in if you prefer to do that verbally. So if folks who are here could just drop a note in the chat with your name and your organization, I'll go ahead and get started here. So today we were just going to go over options on how to make sure the lands that your agency or organization protects, either in fee or in easement, included in 30 by 30. So as I noted, we did a similar webinar just back on Monday, 2 days ago, and that was more of a GIS focus. So if your agency has GIS files or capacity, we just were a little more geared towards those questions, but otherwise the content is the same here. We don't plan to do any deep dive in terms of how we will be assigning gap codes. Well, folks will be assigning gap codes to protected lands. We will go over the logistics of how you can enter that information, but there will be additional and other webinars that cover that specifically. So I'll just walk through a quick recap if you were in on some of the earlier webinars that CCLT hosted about overall 30 by 30, how you can know what information is in 30 by 30 and where we're at now, so the status of the data. We'll go over some options that you have to view the data yourself. So if you want to look at it offline for your organization or your area of interest, and then areas that we know we would like to improve the data. So calling those out that might be of interest to you, and then talking through different ways that you can send us information about your data. So, and as I said, we have discussion sort of Q&A, but you're also free to chime in anytime with those, either by chat or unmute yourself. So just as a quick reminder, 30 by 30 is the CNRA effort to conserve 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by the year 2030. Today, we'll be focusing on the terrestrial portion, not the coastal portion. The one area that's a little vague is in the bay areas or other estuary where the water and the land meet. So if you have questions there, happy to have discussions about those, but those might be more questions that we take back to CNRA or other folks to get answers for you. So, but if those come up, feel free to let us know. So 30 by 30 is meant to protect 30% of California's lands. And so what we need to understand is how we're going to count that 30%. So what gets counted in there and where does that information come from? So that comes from two statewide databases, which are the California Protected Areas Database and the California Conservation Easement Database. Both of these databases have been around for quite some time. They're geospatial GIS databases that we over at GreenInfo are regularly updating. They're meant to serve a number of purposes, so not just 30 by 30, they're also used for recreational and other efforts across the state. So it's important to note that lands being in CPAD or CCED is not the only criteria. You must also meet a biodiversity objective, and that will be measured through the gap code. But it is the first step. So you do need to make sure that your lands are in either or both, if appropriate. There are lands that have both fee and easement protection. We have a lot more information about CPAD and CCED in general through this website here. We are recording the webinar by also, and this slide deck is open, Daria, if you don't mind putting the slide deck link in the chat, you can always reference these slides after the fact if you're interested. And I do try to include URLs on various slides that you may want to go back to. So we know that CPAD and CCED are some of the best statewide protected data in the entire US, but we also know that they can always be better. There are acquisitions always happening and protections through either easements or fee. And so as those happen, we like to get them added to the database. There also might be ones that we just haven't learned about yet. So we're always striving to improve the data and get more information in there. There are over 1,000 agencies and organizations represented within the data. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of coordination needed. So this is done through outreach and responding to incoming requests for updates, but we're always open to those. We know that California is very expansive and diverse, both in its size and the types of protected lands there are. So CPAD and CCED are meant to be more general in terms of very inclusive. So it might be a recreation purpose, it might be a biodiversity purpose, it might be a mixed use purpose. But we tag the data within there so that you can filter to the subset that might interest you. So that just goes back to the fact that CPAD and CCED are broader than 30 by 30, but our main focus right now is making sure that we get those protected for biodiversity included in either or both databases. And to do that, we need your help. So today we'll just go through the quick intro that we just did on 30 by 30. We will show you what's out there in terms of resources and walk through some of those toolkits and other options we have. So if folks are willing, you could put in the chat sort of where you're at now. So have you attended a previous CCLT webinar about 30 by 30? Have you looked through any of the state GreenInfo or CCLT resources and websites, downloaded your toolkit, or tried to submit data to us over at GreenInfo and gotten stuck? Any of that input would be helpful if you want to put that in the chat. And don't feel limited to these options if there are other places that you find yourself.
Amanda, can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I don't see the slides. I don't know if it's just me.
You should make sure. I will stop and reshare. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. There were definitely slides before that, but
okay.
Lost.
I thought it was me, but then yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Very good. And now I've lost the video part, but if you can see me, that's fine. There we go. All right. So here are some options if folks want to put things in the chat about where they're at. And then let me just skim back. So these are the previous slides that you didn't see potentially, but the main one would be this, where we're the information about CPAD and CCED. Okay, so I think we'll start by walking through what we envision as probably the most common workflow to get through the information that you need to have submitted in order to be considered for inclusion in 30 by 30. So I will let Daria walk us through that at a high level.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so this is really a two-stage process where the first stage is to review and revise the data that we have of your land. So the data that is in CPAD and CCD of your lands, we would like you to download the toolkit and then provide us with edits to the attributes and to the geometry. And then you can return the toolkit to us along with any other data that you might have that would support all of these edits. And then once we have updated CPAD and CCD on our side, we will let you know to download the toolkit again, at which point you can begin the second stage of this process, which is assigning gap codes to your now revised lands. Yeah, so really a two-stage process here.
And one reason for that is that you can submit your revisions and data first, and then when you go back to assign your gap codes, that also allows you to view the edits that we've made and ensure that they are represented now the way that you had hoped to see them in the data. And if not, you could also then follow back up with us if we need to make a second set of revisions to correct anything.
Yeah. Okay.
So as we've mentioned a couple of times here, we have a toolkit. And this is for folks who either use GIS or those who don't. We've included materials in there so that you download one zip file and you can pick which files are of interest to you to use. So this is the website where you can find a large amount of information and resources. So we have sort of subsections on the website. And then also it includes the link to where you can download the toolkit. Downloading the toolkit you'll see here is done by agency. This is done for a couple of reasons. One is that it allows you just to look at the lands that your agency is responsible for the management of. That makes the file size smaller. We also have limited attributes. So we typically have a large number of attributes within CPAD and CCED. And what we're doing here is limiting it just to those very key pieces of information that we're hoping to get. That being said, if you're interested in more lands than one is represented in one agency zip file, you are welcome to download any agency zip file. This is all open data, so you could download multiple. Also, if you preferred, you could download the full state if you have GIS, and that would be up here through the Get CPAD CCED. This would allow you to download the full data set for the entire state. So all of the 1,000+ agencies and all of the lands that they have in fee or easement title, or easement, Holden easement or fee title. And if you download that, we also have a manual that explains the data, and we're also available for individual calls, support, or other requests that you have about that. So once you download the toolkit, you'll find if you want to open the shape files or and you have GIS, it would look something like this on the right. But I'll show you other ways to do that for folks who are not going to be using GIS software. But the main thing you'll notice then would be an Excel table that you're able to download. And these are the key pieces of information. As I said, we have an abbreviated set that we're asking you to review in particular. So we hope to make sure we have an accurate name for the park or the property. If you don't have one, that's okay. I know there are some lands that are not named, but if you do have one, it's helpful to have that in there for folks to reference. We'd like to know the level of access available to the public. So that could be that it's open access. That doesn't mean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but it might be something like if it's a community park, it's open during daylight hours, dawn to dusk, seasonal, of that effect. You could have restricted access, which means you might need a permit. Perhaps it's only open seasonally or other restrictions to get there. And then no public access is just simply the public is not allowed to be on the property for whatever reason. Most of our easements are by default marked as no public access. We only change them to restricted or open if the agency holding the easement informs us that there is public access. And then we have the listed managing agency. So this is the filter that you've downloaded when you get the zip file. But what you can do is tell us perhaps we've assigned a property to you that your agency does not manage. You can let us know by telling us that someone else. You can either let us know we don't manage it, we don't know who does, or if you happen to know who does, you can let us know that. If you know the year that your property was first protected, that's very helpful. People like to show change over time, but in order to show the landscape changing over time, we do need to know the year the property was protected. And then we also include the acreage for you of the property, so you can have an estimate of the size to make sure that's in the right ballpark. And then the information about gap code, which would be the second part of the workflow, would be the gap code, and then any notes that you want to include about that. So looking here, this is in the back, the table in Excel that's downloaded. And in this case, I've downloaded the Nature Conservancy. So you can see that there's the name of the park that it's referred to. In this case, there is no public access. TNC is the manager, and it's about 2,500 acres. If you want to view this spatially on a map, perhaps the acreage doesn't look correct to you, or you just want to see and make sure that it's in the correct location and looks accurate, what you can do is click this. This will be a URL that opens what we call the map collaborator down here. If you use this specific link, it will pull up the map and zoom to that particular property itself. So in this case, someone has clicked the Jack and Laura Dangerman Preserve within this, and it's zoomed directly to that property. You can then also click on the map and it will give you more information for the attributes of that property. Now, if you found something was incorrect, you could submit information here through the Excel table in the toolkit. You can simply type that in and save the information, sending it back to us. There are also options within the map collaborator where you can click on the map and leave a note. So you you'll say you want to add a note, drop a point, and then you can type open text. We do request your email when you do that, in case we have additional questions, we could follow up with you. But this is one way to view the information spatially without being in GIS software. And so you can go through each of your properties. Another way would be if you don't want to work on the website, perhaps you'd rather just have all the files in one location. We are happy to send you PDF maps of all of your properties. So these maps that I've shown here are examples from CAL FIRE. This one here is an easement where they have about just under a dozen properties that are all considered part of one easement. And then on the right, we have a fee title that they have. So if this makes more sense to you, we're happy to provide it. So these yellow markings in the background are the parcels that are protected. And then we do include basic information about the location and the aerial imagery in the background. So these are available. We also, if you do want to look at things in Google Earth, we can export your information to a KML or a KMZ format and provide that to you. So that's another additional option here. Where an agency requested to see them, and you can see they're all now listed here on the side. They can zoom to each and find information about those. Those are not included in the toolkit just because we find it's rarely used. If you want it, it's very easy for us to produce those. They tend to be quite small, so we can send you that file normally within just 2 to 3 days, often even same day. All you need to do is send us an email. You can use this email down here in the corner, or you can always contact Aria or myself directly, and we're happy to get you that file. So a recap here is just that if you want agency-specific data, you can go download your toolkit. That will give you this table that has the key information that we're hoping you're able to review. And that's a pretty small file size because it's only including one agency. You can then view that information through the Excel table. You can look at the map collaborator that I showed earlier. We also are happy to send you PDFs and or KML files. If you want the PDFs or the KMLs, just drop us an email. And like I said, we can generate those through scripting. They're quite quick. I think we actually already have them stored, but we can just provide them to you. So I wanted to pause and just ask if there are any questions so far, if people want to put those in the chat or unmute and ask them. We do definitely have time today just to walk through individual cases. So even if they're quite specific to your agency, that's definitely fine to ask. Also, if this is kind of all the information you need, or at some point you feel like you know what you need to know, feel free to drop off early or whatever fits your needs best. And I'm just looking over the attendant list, and I am happy to say a lot of these, if not all, you're all from groups that we have been in some contact with, either by recent 30 by 30 efforts or in the past. So that's good to see. And so from that, I'll let Daria walk through some typical examples of what you might want to look for to make sure your lands are as accurate as possible.
So just before I start, I just wanted to say apologies if you hear a lot of noise. There is some construction that's happening next door, so apologies about any noise that you might hear. So when you begin improvements to your data, what we really look for is if there have been any changes to the names of your property, or if there's a change in the level of access, if there's a different owner or a different manager. So we would like for you to update any of those attributes in the toolkit. There's also obviously sometimes updates to the geometry that need to happen. So if you see that we're missing any of your lands, please do add those in, or send us a parcel number, or just really any kind of data that we can obtain about lands that you have that are not in our data. Also, if you see that we have lands that you are no longer protecting yourself, maybe you've transferred them to someone else, or you know that land is no longer protected, we'd also like to know about that. So if you do transfer it to someone else, it would be great if you can let us know who it's been transferred to, or you can just note that it's in the process of transfer. And there are also some alignment issues that we'd like to address. So when it comes to alignment, CPAD and holdings that are in CPAD and CCD are usually aligned to parcels, to the newest parcels. And so what you can do is you can, give us a note that your data is definitely to be aligned to parcels. There are situations, as in the next slide, you will see that obviously in some cases, holdings are aligned to land features such as a road or a creek. And if that's the case for you and it needs to stay that way instead of being aligned to parcels, please note that in the toolkit for that particular feature. That you'd like it to be aligned, to stay aligned as it is, perhaps to a road or a creek instead of being aligned to parcels. And if you know that there sometimes overlaps between some of your features, if you can just let us know that perhaps there's overlaps that need to be cleaned up, that also is helpful. Okay.
Yes, and also if it's a property that is both fee title and easement protected, feel free to let us know and we'll ensure that it's in both databases. So one thing I do want to highlight for those of us still here is that we do not require that you use the toolkit that we've provided. If you have other existing materials or information, it is perfectly fine to use other methods to tell us. So I think I see that John Muir Land Trust is on the call. You've sent us APNs. I think at this point, we probably have what we need from you on the GIS side. What we'll be doing is doing your updates. We'll give you a notice that, hey, we think they're all done. Here's a place if you want to go review them and make sure that we've properly done that. And then you could start your gap code. But in I would say probably at least half the cases, we expect that folks may be sending us existing information they already have. So if you happen to have your own GIS for your organization, if you just know the list of addresses or lat longs with the property names, if you have maps from other reports, map descriptions, deeds, any of that is acceptable to send to us. So don't feel that you need to use any rigid system to send us information. So here's just sort of a list of things that we find commonly folks send to us, any of these. And as you'll see, I list other. If you have any questions about if something is sufficient, just let us know. A lot of times, basic information such as an APN gives us a really good start. So we can start by putting that information in. And if you know all of your properties are restricted or open access, we can sort of bulk assign things. So definitely let us know if there are ways we can make this more efficient for you to get us the information. And then also just, send us notes that might apply to the existing data you have. So if you send us a 300-page report and there's one map in there, it kind of helps to know generally where. I will scan it and find it, but if you happen to be able to call those things out, it's helpful. Or if you have GIS data, if it has metadata, so we understand the attributes within there, that's helpful to have. But the main thing is sort of how you prefer we communicate with you if and when we have questions. So we generally assume email. I know folks work remotely and it's just a little easier to get back to things when you can. But if you prefer a call, Daria and I are always happy to get on a call, a screen share, go through things. So just let us know if there's a way that we can work with you that's more sufficient for your needs. We're happy to do that. And then the last thing I wanted to cover so folks were aware of is the sort of moving deadlines we have here. So CPAD and CCD, like I said, are standalone products. They're being used by 30 by 30, but they sort of have a life of their own that's much broader. We release them twice a year, once mid-year, June, and once in December. So right now we're coming up close to the mid-year release. We are still accepting edits. We can't guarantee we'll get them all in, but most of the edits we have in hand right now, we feel pretty good. We'll get most of those in the June release. Those are going to predominantly be shape edits, so adding new properties, correcting old ones that had inaccurate boundaries or touching up attributes. We do accept gap code information if you happen to send it, but it's worth noting that CNRA is not doing an update to 30 by 30. So they'll look at the biodiversity lens of that until our December release. So the real deadline, if your concern is 30 by 30 and getting both your properties updated and your gap codes so that they're reflected in the biodiversity element, October 31st is your deadline here. So we're trying to give you plenty of lead time to get to that. That being said, if you would like to see your information reflected in June, perhaps you know it's being used by other agencies that use CPAD or CCED, or you would just like to see it come out sooner, we are trying to make as many as those happen as possible. So the 31st is quickly approaching, but if you can get us that, we will definitely try to get the data in there. So CNRA will take the December release of CPAD CCED with all of the information that updates the geometry, what's protected, and then the 30 by 30 lens of gap code, which is how we're measuring biodiversity. And they will be producing their new release of 30 by 30 in the spring of 2024. And I have a link here to where that is. So biggest deadline is October 31st. If you're feeling ambitious, May 31st. And if you've sent us stuff, we'll probably get most of it, hopefully all of it, in this May release that you have us today. And then, so I can call out, if you look at your toolkit and we make changes, those get updated weekly. You can also send us requests. Basically, I know there are a lot of groups and organizations, but we do try to provide individual one-on-one support wherever needed. So don't be shy about reaching out about that. So I think those are the materials we had to cover today. We're happy to stick around as long as folks have questions or discussion. So with that, we'll open up the chat. I don't know, Daria, if you've scanned through, if there's anything there, and either there or chime in with
I don't see any
questions.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet. Yeah, I don't see any questions.
All righty. I will say we have a webinar coming up on the 30th, which is our first more in-depth look at gap codes. And that is going to be focused on working lands that are agriculture and grazing focused. We do anticipate there will be other topics of interest when assigning to gap codes. So one thing I would welcome you to do either now, if you already have them offhand, if there are regions, like I think we've had input that Sacramento would be a good regional group. I know the Bay Area already has Together Bay Area group where they focus things. And then we're working on, I think, a SoCal. We've done some outreach there, but probably formalizing that more. But if there are also other topics of types of land protection and groups that want to get together for discussion, we're happy to help facilitate that. And that will also run through CCLT. So those will get announced through that email serve where you learned about this. All right, well, we'll hang out if there are questions. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great day and look forward to working with all of you. Oh, Matt, you have a question? Did you want to ask? Or perhaps your hand's just raised. I think you're unmuted, but we don't hear you. All right. Well, we haven't heard from Matt, but I know we've been in touch a few times, so feel free to follow up by email if need be.
And Amanda and Daria, I had probably a simple question, hopefully.
Sure, yeah.
So what I said on Monday, looks like you already have most of the things after just downloading the CPAD lists. There were just, I guess, 2 new properties we're going to be adding to those. And then
wonderful, but you have that acquisition date, so we'll probably be adding that. So
Mhm.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Oh, and I see you even have the 2 in red. Are those the 2 new?
Yeah, I believe so. I can't remember
Awesome.
though.
Thank you. That's especially helpful.
Okay, great.
Great. So as soon as we get those
Please,
updates
we could
made,
hear
we'll
me.
let you know, and then that way you can review them if you're interested and or start your gap assignment.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
I'm testing. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, Matt, I think we hear you.
Okay. Technical issue. Apologies.
No
Matt from
worries.
Department of Conservation. I'm really interested to see about the guidance that you're giving to easement holders. So that's helpful for me. I just wanted to check. This is a good opportunity to do a QAQC update, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Yeah. And then specifically, could you just remind me, ideally we like to map things out initially to the parcel level, but then that can be refined based upon aerial survey or insight information.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. So our default is to go with parcels, but there are certainly agencies that, for whatever reason have a survey or there are natural features, especially within easements. If you happen to want to define the footprint of the easement, which is typically not the full property, all of that's welcome. And if you let us know, then we flag that so that it doesn't get reverted back to a parcel in the future.
Okay, good to know. And then again, I just like to understand the perspective and the guidance you're giving to easement holders. How do you guide people on the GIS acres versus the easement acres when they're doing the review?
Yeah, so we're not too firm on that in the sense that CCED is a newer product than CPAT, and it's also have more sensitivity. So some agencies are more comfortable just having the full property represented. Some want the actual area. So I think it's really up to those submitting. We do have in the documentation of CCED that most are parcel aligned and that the easement will not be applying to the full property. That does mean when you're reviewing your gap codes that if you're assigning your acreage, if there are portions of it, you'll if you want, you can reduce that amount, basically saying anything that is not a part of the easement would become a gap code 4.
Okay, so then that was leading to my next question is, are there subdivisions, subsets of the easement that could be assigned?
Yeah, definitely. So
codes?
your
Okay.
easements can be, if you wanted them just defined in smaller sections, you can have mixed gap codes on any property that you'll be able to report. You could have all 4 gap codes present on the property if that's the most appropriate. And we can also split them up in different ways geographically if you prefer.
Okay, yeah, just interesting. We don't actually hold easements, but we work specifically on ag easements. So I guess my next question would be, what's the latest on agricultural conservation easements relative to 30 by 30?
Yeah, so we have a meeting on the 30th, which is going to be a working group discussion. So that should have gotten announced through there and you can join. So we do have representatives from CNRA who will be attending to help answer. And I think the general guidance is that the agencies that hold the easements are the most appropriate to assign the gap codes because they know it. What we're doing is trying to bring those groups together to facilitate a consistent approach to that. And so in that meeting, we are welcoming people to bring examples. We'll have a few examples and we'll work through the assignment of the gap codes, understanding where the questions come up. And for anything that we aren't able to answer, which will probably be at least a few questions, we will be able to go back to USGS, who are sort of the origin of the gap codes, to present those questions, and to CNRA if there are concerns about how that might shake out. So it's each agency that holds an easement gets the responsibility and the privilege to assign their own gap codes, but that makes it difficult. So what we're looking for is bringing the groups together for consistency. So that one will focus on ag and grazing for those types of easements on the 30th.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to follow because they weren't initially including the working lands that were grazed or cultivated. So interesting to see where that goes after the gap codes are assigned.
Yeah, my understanding is that definitely for grazing, those will be a gap 2 unless there's another conflicting use on the property. But I do think that Kay's had some communications with CNRA And so we've gotten some feedback on that, and we've asked key common questions back to them, so we'll review some of that in the meeting. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that discussion. We did allocate an hour and a half because we knew that might go for a fair amount of discussion between the groups.
Good, thank you. And the next question is about the overlaps. I've submitted a couple of those. Are those helpful, or are they less of a concern when CCED overlaps with CPAD?
So CPAD and CCED can and will overlap at times, and then there are the sad slivers and gaps and things. If you're willing to point them out, that's great. Right now we have to prioritize putting other edits first that are larger, sort of an impact of acreage. But we definitely take input. So if someone submits information to us, even if we can't do it, we log it for the future, so it's not lost. So if and when we can. So if you're willing, and definitely if there are ones that are troublesome, like bigger or for whatever reason need resolution, you can just flag those as critical, and I'm happy to look at those quicker than others.
So a good investment of time. Yeah, we do appreciate it. Normally we just notice them when we're trying to prepare display maps and there's a slight overlap. It's not critical, but for presentation purposes,
yes,
I'll do a quick customization of it just so no one asks a question, but they're minor.
Yeah,
overlaps.
it is frustrating, and a lot of times that comes back to assessors. They tend to do little shifts and changes to their parcels, and so they're a little hard to keep up. We do have Daria actually actively working to see if there's a more automatic way we can take those small bulk updates from assessors, but we want to test that out a lot first to make sure we don't cause other issues by doing that alignment. Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm thinking a lot of what I'm seeing are 20-year-old easements and much older protected areas. So I think those are just legacy, and they're perfectly acceptable. I always tell everyone that the benefit is having a robust data set that's populated for the state. And there's still a lot of properties we need to get in there. So we really benefit from it, and we're happy that you're distributing it. Yeah. And when we're adding a new property, if we notice something like that, we do try to touch up the area quickly if we're able. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I know you've submitted plenty of helpful information in the past. We appreciate all of it. Yeah, their observations, again, we don't hold easements, but I have the opportunity to map out the ones that are funded by our programs and depend on our partners at the Land Trust to submit. Yes, yeah, and we do actually, within easements in particular, we track if it was submitted by the easement holder themselves or a larger sort of group source already. So then if and when we get information from the Land Trust themselves, we're able to replace that, knowing that's more authoritative. Yeah. Super helpful. Yeah, I was curious for land trusts that have lesser capacity. Will you be providing assistance? I'm thinking of the one that's somewhere there in the Central Coast. They might need a little bit more assistance because they don't have capacity. Is that something? Yeah, we're to help them. Yeah, we're certainly happy to. We do find some can submit either existing maps or APNs. And so what we can do is produce information and try to send it back to them in a pretty ingestible format like a PDF. So if they give us an APN list, we could extract that data, send them some quick PDF maps and say, is this accurate? And if so, then it can get included. But yeah, one-on-one support, definitely. If folks reach out to us, we're happy to send things back and forth or even jump on calls with them to review things on screen. Yeah, much appreciated. Yeah, it's important. And I know that their efforts are normally needed in other areas, not doing the technical GIS work. So we're happy to help support that part. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. All right, we have just a few folks left on the call. Any other questions from any of you? Otherwise, I think we'll wrap up and let folks get back to their days. All right. I think that's it. Email us. I can ask one more question, Amanda. It's kind of off topic, but would you be a resource that I could refer somebody to when they're looking for mapping tools? Sure. Field tools? I have some land trusts that have very low capacity and they're trying to figure out just how to take a map in the field. And
And I know all the techniques that work, but I wondered if you might know of other
Yeah,
people,
you can
resources.
certainly, yeah, send them our way, and
Mhm.
either we can offer support or we can help try to find them someone who can offer that.
Yeah, it's an office and also the ability to take the tools out in the field.
Sure.
For the actual
Yeah, yeah.
site.
So we have some experience, and then we also know other groups that have done it efficiently, so we can help build that capacity through
But I could refer
knowledge.
to you.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, sure.
Appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good day.
Bye.
Okay, Claire, I think we're good on the recording, and we'll stop sharing.